Welcome, fellow Storm Riders. You are officially a rider on the Hypnotic Storm yet again. Welcome to session number 48 of Brain Software with Mike Mandel, and I'm Chris Thompson. And we're at it again. He has a resting heart rate of 54 beats per minute. He eats kale every day of the week and owns the world's finest private AC/DC museum. Please welcome to the center of the hypnotic world epicenter, the hypnotic buccaneer, Mike Mandel.
Arr. Yes, we're here once again, ladies and gentlemen. Notice my voice is strong despite the cold that's just hanging on. This damnable thing, Chris, is lodged in my substantial sinuses and is camped out there. But otherwise, feeling fantastic, doing 200 squats 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, just having an absolute blast, living life on the edge, the hypnotic edge, and loving it, riding the edge of the hypnotic storm. And let me just say, yes, I eat kale every day because kale is the new beef. My heart rate is 54 beats a minute, and that was, as you know, after a double espresso, which means it's considerably lower, although
That's
still
right.
above the point of death. And the world's finest privately owned AC/DC museum is without a doubt the case, because there's only 50 contenders worldwide for this, because you have to own one of the signed and played Angus Young SGs.
Right.
There's only 50 made, and I own one. Now, the other 49 guys probably don't have the tour shirt worn by the original crew. They don't have the guitar pick. They don't have the photographs, the boxer shorts, the tattoo, the Brian Johnson hats. Anyway, yesterday was Angus Young's birthday, March 31st. I believe he was 59. Happy birthday, Angus. I know you listen. Not.
Awesome. Hey, so let's get back to some serious discussion now about hypnosis. We were talking about a particular topic. I'll let you introduce it. And we needed to set the record straight.
This is difficult for me because, you know, Chris, I always admit when I'm wrong, although I don't admit I'm wrong very frequently because usually I'm not wrong. And I say my discussion points on this podcast are 99 and 44/100% pure, like ivory soap. But sometimes I get it wrong, so we're going to make a retraction of a point I've been drilling home for a long time, and I think this is going to startle some of you, but hear me out. I have been on the cutting edge, the very vanguard of assault against the script readers for the last few years, because I saw it as sitting reading a script that someone was not interacting with the person, it was not dealing with a human being, but was just running a program, the same as putting on an old record and letting it play and wondering what kind of results you're getting with a hypnotic subject. But as you know, I've had to retract publicly my condemnation of scripts across the board.
Okay, so why don't you talk a little bit more? Because when you brought this up with me, I was quite frankly shocked, and I want to understand more what's changed.
Okay, well, I didn't go into it when I spoke with you about it. The whole aspect of scripts was I was opposed to them because it seemed like someone was just reading a list of commands to someone. But in reality, because you can structure a script in advance, I'm now seeing them as the best possible way of doing hypnosis because you know in advance what you're going to be saying. So rather than attempting to generate language on the fly, which of course I can do, and I know you can as well, Chris, it's better for our students to sit and read a script at someone, because at least that way every detail can be planned in advance and the person will go into a trance based on what you know you're going to say to them. Now, when they're in trance, what are you going to do? Read a script at them. You can have a book made of these, and you can have just thumb tabs. So say you got someone in a trance and you notice they're only at level 16 on the Davis-Husband scale. You can then flip to the number 16 in your book, and there should be a script that you can read. In fact, I'm planning on putting together a book and maybe making this available as an ebook for those of you who want to get this kind of thing, because then turning to a thumb tab, instantly being able to read the right script is going to be one of the most powerful things you can do.
Okay, and when we do this, we're going to actually price it at the grand price of $0, because it's all completely stupid.
April Fools! It is April 1st here in Toronto. It's still before noon, so it's still legal.
Globally accepted time period for playing April Fool's jokes.
Oh, hilarious. As if I would ever switch. Hey, listen, guys, scripts still suck. They're still stupid. Don't use them. Learn to run your brain and your subject's brains through an effortless communication loop and disregard everything I've just said.
All right, so we'll come clean. So last night when
I'm a comic genius.
We were talking about doing this podcast, and Mike came up with the idea of perhaps we should do an entire episode as an April Fool's joke.
That would have been my plan.
Which would have been really funny. My fear was that all of you listening, some of you would actually take us seriously, the whole thing, just think it was complete nonsense, and then give up on us.
Well, yeah,
and never
especially if
get
this is someone who finds it for the first time.
Yeah.
Listen to the most recent one. go, these guys are insane. This is all crap. What are they talking about?
Yeah. So anyway, we compromised and decided to just do that at the beginning as our little joke.
All right, so now let's get on to
scripts
the
are still
real
useless,
podcast.
but they are still helpful as transcripts and idea generation.
Or
Never
April
read
Fool's
at
Day
someone
jokes,
for
yes.
hypnosis. Yes. Okay, let's get to some actual serious hypnosis
All right.
then. We promised on podcast number 47 that we would go into some depth on metaphor, because we answered a question from somebody who had asked, well, what are these stories at the end of the podcast? What is their purpose? And we had just talked about it briefly, that these are metaphors. They do have a real purpose, and that perhaps we would get to it in the next podcast, which is right now.
Right.
So let's do it.
Okay, well, let's just give an overview first. When all learning proceeds properly, it goes from the general to the specific. So what are we talking about when we say metaphors? Well, in the English language, we have simile and we have metaphor. Now, a simile is when you use the word like or as. You can say the headache was like an electric drill boring through my head. Mm-hmm. So you're using a simile. You're saying like, or you can say it was as if, someone was smashing me with a sledgehammer, the headache. Mm-hmm. So that is as. That's a simile. A metaphor makes a direct connection between two unrelated things. And it's a way of simply building on a description, so to make it understandable. So if I describe my kitchen as a war zone, it's going to be really messy and there's stuff everywhere and whatever. Well, maybe landmines or so, and you might take it the wrong way.
Right.
But that's a metaphor.
And we all understand it's a metaphor, even though we don't necessarily know the language and we haven't heard it before. We understand that your kitchen wasn't actually a war zone.
Right. Now, that's in the use of language. But when we talk about metaphors specifically with hypnosis, we are using one example or one story, typically quite short, as a means of creating a comparison with something happening in the person's life and a solution we wish to create. Mm-hmm. So I can tell a general metaphor, and a general metaphor will have a salubrious effect on essentially anybody who listens to it. It will have a positive effect. And general metaphors are great ones, like the liana vine, like B1651, and these others that I've told throughout the podcasts. So, and Milton Erickson was the master at this. He would say, well, it reminds me of that patient I had last week. When he said that, he was talking about you. And then your guard would be down because he'd be talking about this patient he had last week. And he'd tell you this story. And all of a sudden, these wonderful changes would happen in your life. Now, here's the reason. The metaphor has two layers of understanding. There is content, which entertains and keeps the conscious mind occupied. And there is construct or structure, which works with the unconscious mind's pattern matching system to solve your problem.
Okay, so the idea here is that a metaphor takes the shape of some kind of story that you can deliver conversationally to someone else, so that the content of the story will be entertaining and somewhat interesting and maintain their focus and their attention.
Right.
And the message, the real reason that you're telling that story, is something that you're not consciously disclosing. You're never going to explain to them after the fact, which we'll get to in a moment. And it's going to have some effect on them that will cause change.
Yes, that's right. And I don't know if we gave the liana vine metaphor, but look,
you did, yeah. It's way
let's
back.
touch the points on this again. This is a John Grinder one he gave me, and I love it. Liana vine is a vine that grows in the very heavy jungle where you have ground cover. I'll give you just a thumbnail sketch: ground cover and scrub and bushes and things, right up to tall trees bursting up from the undergrowth in the dense jungle, the rainforests. Liana vine grows up the tallest trees in the forest, but it does a very odd thing. It releases seed pods. They drop down into the soil, they put down roots, and then it becomes something which is almost unheard of for green plants, which need sunlight for photosynthesis. The liana vine pods, as they sprout and become rooted plants or little seedlings, become negatively heliotropic, meaning they move away from sunlight. They go into the darkest part of the forest, they become established, and then they send up vines. The vines find their way climbing back up the tallest trees into the sunlight again. Now, that's the quick version. If you tell this slowly, with intention, and gradually slip into your hypnotic voice, that's right, it will have a profound effect on a lot of people in a lot of ways, in a positive sense, because the content is about vines and sunlight and, layers of shrubbery, but the structure will match things in people's lives. And I've told this to therapists And I've told it to a lot of people who've reported using it in their own practice with phenomenal results. I gave the example that I used this with a woman whose daughter was running around with a guy who was nailed for cocaine possession. He was going to prison, and she was living this wild life and was going to wait for him to get out of prison. And her mom saw this girl's life was just crashing and burning, and the mom was stressed beyond belief. And I told her this metaphor, and the woman went into state. She went into trance. Her jaw dropped a bit. Her lower lip became full. Her face became flushed. Her breathing changed. And I got to the end of the story, and she said, wow, that's some story. Sounds like somebody's life. Now, what happened was her unconscious mind mapped across the details of the story, the metaphor. There's a thing that's growing healthy in the light, and then it starts putting down pods, grows into the darkness, establishes, and then finds its way back up. And the story to her is her daughter used to be nice and in the light and happy, and has now gone through this necessary phase of wandering around in the darkness, but she was going to find her way back into the light again, and she had to just back off and let it happen, because the woman was in her 20s, so she's allowed to live her life however she wants to, although it's unpleasant for the mother. So the structure delivers the real message.
Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit more in terms of the way that you use metaphors and how they're delivered, because they're effectively a conversational tool. And so for all the people out there thinking, well, I don't ever want to actually practice hypnosis as a profession or anything like that, you can still benefit and should benefit tremendously from learning how to do this, because when people are encountering some sort of problem, some sort of difficulty in life, they're talking to you about it, and you can end up just conversationally telling them a story. Now, sometimes it's pre-planned, and you have this like a library, right? Mike, you've got tons of metaphors in your brain, and, and you can deliver them flawlessly practically every single time, and just pull out the necessary one. But you never, to jump back to the idea of scripts that we were joking about earlier, it's not like somebody walks into your office for hypnosis, or a friend walks into your, living room to talk to you about a problem, and they tell you the problem, and you say, "Oh, hold on,
let me tell you a metaphor."
And they
let me get my book of scripts.
Grab your book, open it up, and go, here it is, and start reading at them, because then what would happen? So the brain of the recipient of that story now is going, he's reading me a story. This isn't a natural conversation anymore.
He's trying to fix me.
Like when it's not part of a natural conversation that just seems genuine, it doesn't work the same way, does it?
No, not at all. And Milton Erickson said, with all his metaphors, he drew from his own personal experience. And in one of his books, I think it was a purple paperweight in his office. It might have been an elephant or something. I'm just giving you the sort of basic idea of the story. And a young woman, one of his patients, was in his office, saw this paperweight, asked him a question about this thing. And his answer was a story about how these three women in college had given him this paperweight, and it so fit her life and what was happening that she thought he was making it up. And then years later met these women and realized it was a true story. The best metaphors will come from your own experience, because everyone who has reached the age of adulthood has things that have happened to them, stuff that's gone on in their life that is a proving ground for metaphors. It's a rich treasure trove that you can draw things from that will have a salubrious effect on people. Let me give you an example, Chris, and I don't know if you were at this training or not. When I used to teach at Toronto School of Theology for NLP Canada years ago, we had a woman in the class we're going to call Cindy, only because that was her name, and she was a lovely woman, and she was a psychologist, and she came out to study with me, and in fact, she was a very, very good student, but she asked a question in the class, and I can't remember what her question even was. And I said, Cindy, it reminds me of growing up in Toronto. I used to live near Coxwell Avenue, and we had a popcorn man came through when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, which is true. The whole thing's true. The popcorn man was an elderly Italian man who had a little cart that he would wheel around by hand, and on the back of this cart was some kind of burner, and he would pop popcorn on this cart, and he had a little whistling tea kettle that you'd hear coming up the street. And he'd pour melted butter on it, sprinkle salt on it, hand you a bag of fresh popcorn, which was amazing, and it was 10 cents. And I said, we really enjoyed getting this popcorn. It was very exciting when we were kids. And I said, we went on to play a game. And this is true as well. We took our tricycles. Now, you got to realize, Cindy's asked me some question, and I'm answering her with a story from my childhood. I have no idea why I'm telling it.
Which we're going to come back to.
We're going to come back to that point. So I said we used to take our tricycles, turn them upside down, and hold the front wheel pedals and walk down the street rotating this wheel and saying, "Here comes the popcorn man." Did you ever do that?
No, I've never done it, but I've heard
Popcorn Man.
I've heard you tell the story.
This woman burst into tears in the class and said to me, "How could you know? How could you possibly know?" Now, know what? I still have no idea.
Yeah, you don't know. But okay, so I want to jump back to this because you've done this stuff for so long. Your intuition is so good. Your unconscious mind is calibrating so effectively that sometimes you're doing things you don't even know why you're doing them, and they work. For the rest of us who are still learning all of this stuff and aren't at your skill level yet, and we all want to be, what is a general description you can give to make up a story or use a story from your childhood or from your life or from someone else's life and apply it to another person's problem?
It's a strange answer, Chris. And you know from our online Hypnosis Academy, one of the videos we ran with the young lady who wanted to get back in shape. And then I deconstructed afterwards what I had done put it in the cheat notes.
Yes.
And then only then I realized consciously what I was doing unconsciously and follow all the processes. And that's how it should be. As you all become better hypnotists, and everyone listening to this is a hypnotist, if you've ever told a fairy tale, a story, anything, you put people in trances with varying degrees of success, everyone listening can benefit from this one statement Milton Erickson said once, or maybe he said it many times. He said, "You can always trust your unconscious mind." To which Tad James added, "Because if you can't trust your unconscious mind, whose unconscious mind can you trust?" Now, it sounds trite, but it's very true. Well, it's true. It's things are either true or not. They're not very true. Caught myself in language police violation there. That's all right. But you can actually generate stuff on the fly from your own experience, and you will freak yourself out because you are unconsciously calibrating a host of things going on and a wide variety of transactions, psychodynamic transactions between you and an audience or you and someone else, and you will amaze yourself sometimes with how it will change people.
Would you say, is it fair to say, that very often you can go with your gut, go with your intuition on what you think is going to be a story that seems to fit a situation, even though you don't quite know where you're going with it yet, and you're going to figure it out as you deliver it?
Definitely, Chris. And that's the level to get to, where you reach an unconscious competence with these metaphors, and it's just a matter of practice and trusting your unconscious, just stepping out over the abyss and believing you're going to walk on air. And that's what it takes. Your intuition will generate it. And very often, Chris, and you know this is true from seeing me work for years, I'll begin answering and I have no idea what I'm even saying at the beginning of the sentence. My unconscious is a couple of seconds ahead of what my conscious mind is. So I'm actually listening to it myself at first.
So if you're not even at that point yet, though, where you can just go with a story, I think people need a bit of a framework. So let's maybe we can give people a framework.
We talk about isomorphism.
Isomorphism, exactly. So let's do that.
Okay, isomorphism, it means it's a one-to-one correspondence. So let me give you a quick example. Do you want to do the clockmaker one? I can give you the...
Sure.
Okay. A number of years ago when I was doing my initial NLP training in 1993 with Georgian Bay NLP and studying Richard Bandler's strain, one of my teachers was an amazing British guy called Chris Dunkley, who's since departed, and I had great respect for him. The other trainer was very good too, but Chris was... I sort of clicked with him a little bit more. And he gave me a task to pass my NLP practitioner training. I had to fix one of the other students from a particular behavior, which in NLP is called premature closure. Premature closure means you think you got something and you haven't yet. You think you understand, but you're not there. You think you've fixed someone, but they still have problems. It's not nailing down everything and getting it all sorted out. It's moving on before you're ready to move on. And so Chris said to me, he wanted me to develop a metaphor and tell it to this other man who we're going to call Steve and see him change before my eyes to stop his premature closure. So I wrote the metaphor and I had lunch with Steve at one of the trainings. I said, "Hey, bro, I got a new metaphor I'm thinking of using in class. Can I run it by you?" So now I've distanced myself one step. This is for the class.
So this is how you turned it into a conversation.
Right. So his guard is completely down. I didn't say to him, "Steve, you got a problem with premature closure. Let me see if I can fix that with this story."
And so other people who are studying hypnosis listening to this, if you've heard the term, which we've talked about here, critical faculty, not factor, this is when we say getting the guard down, this equates very much to bypassing the critical faculty.
Bypassing it, getting it out of the way, depotentiating its power to interfere. So he's eating his lunch, so he's now also distracted, and he's listening to this story. Here's the story. I'll give you the short version. Once upon a time, there was a medieval town that had an amazing clockmaker. This clockmaker was an old man, and he could fix or make any kind of clock, from pocket watches to wrist watches to mantelpiece clocks, cuckoo clocks, and even huge grandfather clocks. And he got so good at it, he would also repair them for all the people in the town and had a thriving business, and everyone would bring their clocks to him and he would fix them. And as often happens in these stories, a young man came through town who was an apprentice clockmaker, and he determined that he too could do this because he was a clockmaker as well. So he wanted to open a thriving business and did so down the street when in competition with the master clockmaker. Realize I told it very slowly and intently in hypnotic language, or at least a hypnotic tonality. I didn't rush it like I'm rushing it now. So he opens his business. People flock to him. His prices are cheaper. He fixes everybody's clocks. Everybody's happy. But one day, a wizard comes to town. And the wizard comes in and sees him. And he says, I see you have your own business. He said, I do. And he said, I see you're a clockmaker and a repairman. He said, I am. I can repair any kind of clock. And the wizard said, would you like to see something? And the young man wanted to, so the wizard took him outside, down an alleyway where there's a huge courtyard behind the shops. And it was filled with people looking bewildered. And they had wristwatches that had stopped winding, clocks that would no longer cuckoo, and even huge grandfather clocks and wheelbarrows that would no longer chime or work properly. And the young man said, these were all my customers. What has happened? And the wizard said, you do not have the skill sets yet to fix these so they stay fixed. Go and study with the master clockmaker, apprentice with him, and when he says it's time and that your work will stand and last, then you can open your own shop. And the young man took this to heart and studied with the old master, and soon was very, very good at repairing clocks that stayed repaired. Now, Steve goes woof, goes red, goes into state, and his problem with premature closure completely disappears, and he is totally unaware of this exchange that has happened between us. So isomorphism, what we mentioned, is a one-to-one correspondence, meaning the details of the story are to entertain the conscious mind and keep it involved, but the structure of the story is what affects the unconscious mind through the brain's pattern matching system.
And it must be covert.
It must be covert. In fact, Chris mentioned earlier, we were going to say, you never point it out to the person. As soon as you explain a metaphor, it stops working because you bridge it to conscious awareness. So, in the story, the old clockmaker was the NLP trainer. The young clockmaker was Steve with his premature closure. The clocks and watches were the clients, or at least their minds, their problems. And the wizard was me.
Mike Mandel.
Thanks, buddy. And this had its effect. That's the isomorphic mapping across. So how do you design an isomorphic metaphor? And in my classes, in my master classes, people have to come in and they're given a task to write a metaphor as a group for a very specific purpose.
And it's always fun.
It's always fun. So you got a 9-year-old girl who's bedwetting and can't stop. The doctor says there's no physiological reason, so they write a metaphor. Someone delivers it to the class. Or another one I use a lot is there's a 55-year-old banker who's working himself into an early grave. His blood pressure's too high and he needs to slow down. He needs to take a vacation. Give him a metaphor. And one of the secrets is the indication does not have to be one that will match the person exactly. So you're not going to ever say, you know, there was once this 55-year-old banker. The guy's going to go, you're talking about me.
Yeah.
No, instead it's, once upon a time there was a young fairy princess, and his guard is completely down because gender doesn't matter in metaphors. It's the structure. Remember, your brain has a pattern matching system. If you see someone on the street who you immediately like or dislike, it's because the fusiform gyrus in your brain has made a pattern match with a face of somebody you know, and you have to immediately say, who does this remind me of?
So let me give an example that I've used here. So let's say, and this is a real example from my life, that you are talking to somebody about their physical health. And if you happen to know, as I did at the time, that this person was just buying an older home, like a home built in the 1940s that was going to require significant maintenance, well, how easy and natural is it to slip into a story and talk about that time that you bought an older home and realize that you needed to take care of it better, and you're slipping in embedded commands and you're telling a story.
Perfect.
You're talking about a house.
With the topic. Yes. Yeah. But it maps across to the person's life. And as Chris said, you can put in embedded commands and analog marking and all of these things, which are a higher degree of skill, but they're all quite easy to do if you're properly trained.
Right.
So isomorphism is a one-to-one correspondence. Remember, you never point it out. You never say, did you get it? Your Uncle Roy is the tomato plant, and the visit to the dentist was that trip you took to Spain? No, never explain it.
Let's also, let's teach the most critical part of the ending. There has to be a resolution to the problem in the story. Right. You can't leave it hanging.
Right, because the brain will map the resolution across and we'll learn from the experience and we'll say, oh, I can apply this to this other problem.
Right.
Your unconscious isn't missing anything. It's processing maybe 3 to 20 million bits of information per second. It's monitoring everything, including what you're consciously thinking.
Right. So when the wizard comes in and points out the problem that these customers are all having with their watches and then gives the younger clock repair person the instructions to go and study longer and become an expert, that is the solution right there.
Right, and it can be embedded as well. So think of it. You've told this whole story, and then you get to the point, and you say to Steve, and the wizard looked at the young clockmaker and said, now I point at Steve and look right at him as I say it.
Embedded command, quotes technique.
You can find a way of whatever it is, and then back into the story. So it's slipping right in as a direct command going into the unconscious.
Okay, so if we get questions on this, we would be more than happy to address them in the next coming up podcasts, because this is a really important topic that if any of you are interested at all in improving your level of communication, being able to influence people, especially in a covert way, without formal trance, this is the way to do it. This is the way to do it. Now, let's talk about how this connects into mindscaping, because we have a class coming up in June. For Mike's new, I guess it's
a year,
almost 2 years old now at this point. It's called Mindscaping. And when you came up with this, the real reason that you came up with this is because you realized that when Milton Erickson would tell a metaphor, he had this knack to be able to figure out exactly what story to tell to solve someone's problem. And you have that obviously too now. A lot of new students, it takes a long time.
Got to get the metaphor right.
To develop.
Like Erickson used to have a kid come in and the kid plays Little League and he's got his baseball glove and his cap, and Erickson would say, when I was a boy and I used to play baseball a lot, the kid perks up immediately.
Because he's
calibrated.
calibrated.
And he tells a metaphor, which now ties in and changes this kid because he's doing hypnosis covertly by talking to him. Because Milton Erickson had an advantage most of the world doesn't have, which is Milton Erickson's unconscious mind. So the thing about mindscaping is, when I discovered this, it blew my mind because mindscaping is mind-blowing. Basically, the unconscious mind of your subject gives you the metaphor that will unlock the problem. It provides the combination for the lock, which is amazing. So it always works in that regard. And I've taught this to therapists and teachers. And if you're a sociologist, a counselor, a guidance teacher, whatever, you can use mindscaping in your practice and make some deep changes with people without any formal hypnosis whatsoever.
So it's very cool. It's coming up in June. It's
June
available.
7 and 8, I believe. It's a weekend-long course right at the University of Toronto. And bargain basement price. Come and study with me. Check on the website, and it's starting to fill up now.
It is, and it's MikeMandelHypnosis.com, and I believe it's /mindscaping for the actual page. And if it's not, then you're going to find it from the menu. It's very easy to find.
And again, if you're a hypnotist, a psychotherapist, a sociologist, a counselor, whatever, even a teacher, there are techniques in mindscaping. You will learn it inside out, and you'll have it done on you through the weekend to improve all sorts of areas in your own life, and it will be mind-blowing for you to explore the internal landscape of your own unconscious and the unconscious mind of other people.
Absolutely. Okay, now there's one thing that I made in my notes here that we wanted to talk about, because you've often talked about different types of language patterns. We've talked about them on this podcast. One of the ones that we love is this embedded command with appeal to authority, or just the idea of appealing to authority. So I thought we could talk about it, but then let's talk about how it gets misused. And we found a really interesting example of this.
Yeah. Appeal to authority, Dr. Robert Cialdini mentions as a classic means of influence, and especially if the authority is not just an authority, but a world-class authority, an authority someone respects. We automatically believe authorities. And if you see, many, many years ago, there was a TV show that some of you are old enough to remember. It's called Marcus Welby, MD. And Robert Young played this medical doctor, Marcus Welby. And it was a very popular show. And so he then got a lucrative gig doing TV commercials. It might have been for coffee or something, decaffeinated coffee or whatever. And he would still be Robert Young in the commercial, but he'd be dressed like Marcus Welby with a white lab coat and a stethoscope around his neck. And people believe him because he seems like Marcus Welby telling them all these health things.
Even though they actually know he's a famous actor.
Right.
It's this
anchor.
It's
firing this state of trust and authority. And any medical doctor will tell you that people will come in and ask them questions about their finances. Yeah, how should I invest? Do you think I should buy that house? Because the person's a doctor, therefore he's an authority. But we are only authorities in our given fields. If you ask me about finance, I won't have a freaking clue. If you ask me about something about hypnosis, I'll probably be able to answer you quite well. So this appeal to authority is something that works in human nature because we do bond in groups and in packs and in families and in tribes, and we do immediately give some sort of approval and trust to someone who is in the controlling element position. We're back to the law of requisite variety here. Whoever is in the controlling position or the authority position, we will naturally pay homage to in some respect. Now, this website we saw...
Which the context is somebody asked us, what's your opinion of so-and-so, which we're not going to name.
We're not going to say. We don't take shots at people.
So we checked out the website and we noticed.
Right. But just to clarify, guys, we really don't take shots at people. I will rip bad technique to the ground. And I really will.
In this case, it's a stage hypnotist whose skills are totally... fine. I mean, he has some funny quirks about how he does.
Yeah.
He's an effective stage hypnotist. Right. Let's just leave it at that.
Let's leave it at
But that's not the point.
That's not the point. But then he has a recognized sports authority. Chris, stop picking your hand. You're callous on your hand. You're picking it.
Okay.
Maybe I can cure that. We can fix it. We have a recognized sports authority who we're also not going to name.
No, because it'll be too obvious.
Right. And this authority says that this man is the world's greatest hypnotist.
Yes.
It's like if I said, Tiger Woods claims Mike Mandel is the best hypnotist in the world.
Yeah, or Michael Jordan says that, my sister is the world's best chess player.
Yeah, or Justin Bieber says Chris Thompson is the best co-host of any podcast in the world. Like, what does Justin Bieber know about that? Or anything for that matter. In fact, a great joke to do on people. I said to my wife a while back, I said, look at this book. And I held it up in the bookstore. The Wisdom of Justin Bieber. She went, shut up! Believed it was a book. I said, just kidding. But yeah, so it's an appeal to authority, tying a sports figure to his hypnotic ability.
But the funny thing is that this actually works because most people aren't aware that they connect this particular athlete's fame and therefore authority.
Language police. I have to jump on that.
What did I say?
You said athlete.
Athlete? Did I put an extra E in it?
You made it 3 syllables.
Oh,
it's only a 2-syllable word. Athlete.
I think I was in my mind thinking about what am I going to say next?
Well, Chris, it's not what you were thinking.
It's what I said.
It's what you said.
I know. so this athlete, most people in their minds, no, I didn't. Yeah, April Fool's.
Athlete. You did say
athlete.
Okay.
I'll say it really quickly. This athlete.
Yeah.
People are reading it not aware that they're connecting his authority in sports to his authority about this particular guy's hypnosis skills, where there is none. And it's hilarious.
You made the point, Chris, that's really interesting there. It's the fact that they are unaware. The average person has no idea how subject they are to manipulation, and everyone thinks, oh, no, I see through all that. I can tell. It amazes me. I have relatives who are experts on every subject imaginable, even if they've never studied them.
I have a feeling this is closely related to the because technique, where whatever you say, whatever instruction you give, do X, Y, Z, because reason ABC, it is just presumed that the reason is valid. And it doesn't matter if the reason is valid or not.
People like reasons, is Cialdini's explanation for that.
Let me in line because I need to make some copies.
Right.
Well, the reason is presumed to have some validity, just like the authority is presumed to be real. I mean, even though it's sports is not related to hypnosis.
It just maps across, and people are vulnerable to this stuff all the time. This kind of manipulation can occur in a lot of ways, Chris, and it's very, very interesting. Do you know you can get almost 100% compliance with hypnosis if you do a particular thing?
And what is that?
It was a series of tests done, I believe, in the U.S. What they did was they get subjects in a room, and they would have hidden speakers below the floor and hidden red lights. And they'd start giving the trance induction and say, and in a while, I want you to imagine you're seeing red lights through your eyelids. And they'd start turning up these lights gently. And the person would go, oh, yeah, oh, yeah. They say, I want you to imagine you hear music playing in the distance. They turn up classical music really faint. And the person immediately thinks, it's working, it's working, it's working. And they determined they could get 100% compliance with this. And this is the same thing we're seeing when a certain televangelist who will be nameless and should be shot. Don't go shoot him. I'm speaking metaphorically, of course. Will work with knocking people over on stage. It's supposedly the power of God. And he'll pick one person, knock them over, and then somebody else and knock them over. And he'll do this multiple times. The audience keeps seeing it. Then he'll do it with a larger and larger group. And people see this occurring again and again. Then he starts whipping his coat around and doing it at the audience. And they all start falling over on cue. And people have no idea how susceptible they are to suggestion and appeals to authority and all of these things.
Very interesting stuff. Very interesting. So I have a feeling we're going to get a lot of questions from some of the content that we've just talked about.
We always get a lot of questions, Chris.
Yes, and we will tackle your questions in upcoming podcasts. We actually have quite a lot of material that we are dying to get out there to you all. So
yes, we do.
Before we do the closing metaphor, Mike, let's just remind everyone that they can head on over to MikeMandelHypnosis.com. There is an awesome free ebook. I've been doing some work on the website and putting together cool looking pages. You can
you have.
You can sign up and get the Brain Software ebook, which Mike has written quite a while. Has written. Is that even grammatically correct?
That's all right.
Has written.
Say wrote, typically.
Mike wrote many years ago, but this is the same content that gets delivered in keynote presentations that he does for corporations that pay him a lot of money. And these notes, you get them for free.
We give them for free.
So just put your email address into the box on the website.
We don't spam anybody. You know?
That's right.
Yeah.
We send you emails, but you can click an unsubscribe link if you don't want them anymore.
Right.
And it actually does work. We are not spammers. So, yeah, join the list because you're going to get some really awesome stuff. And if you want to learn more about these techniques that we've been talking about, head on over to MikeMandelHypnosis.com/academy, where you can join the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy online training, which is totally awesome.
And let's just quickly say the May Architecture of Hypnosis has been sold out since the second week of February. It's been sold out. Mindscaping 2 days coming up in June. The next course will be September when we're doing the graphology 2-day handwriting analysis course. People are already buying into that one and coming out. We've had people do the 1 day originally, coming back now that it's a 2-day training. It's a great course. You're going to love it, and you'll see through people as though you're a psychic. It will blow your mind. And then, of course, the next Architecture of Hypnosis, we already have signups.
Yes.
In November.
So what's happening is with the May Architecture of Hypnosis being sold out, we're funneling people into the May into the May class, into the November class. And if there does happen to be any cancellations in May, we will offer people in the November class in a priority sequence an ability to move to the May class. So what that means to you is that the November class is filling up. In fact, both of the weekend courses, the Mindscaping and Graphology and the Architecture of Hypnosis coming up in November, are about half full at this point.
So if you want to come and study with Chris and I in Toronto at the very epicenter of world hypnosis, you have to book early because November will sell out and your next chance will be May of 2015.
Right. And the reason for all of this, of course, is that this podcast has a global audience that is growing and the size of our classroom is not.
Correct. We will keep it small, personal classes so everybody gets hands-on training.
We are not turning this into some giant ballroom filled with chairs like a wedding
and chandeliers and stuff. Okay, let me give you the closing metaphor.
Go for it.
Once again, this is a true one. It came out of my own experience. When I was in my 20s, a good friend of mine, Steve Warrer, who's a kick-ass guitarist. Can we say kick-ass?
Sure.
Or we'll edit it out.
That's totally family-friendly.
Okay. He's an amazing guitarist out in Western Canada. Grew up in Toronto. We went to high school together. He was a wizard at guitar even at age 16, playing Led Zeppelin and Hendrix and stuff back then. Anyway, he got me into fishing when I was in my 20s. And my cottage on the Trent River that I've told in other stories when I horrified myself is about 60 feet deep in places because it has a large, a pathway for large ships go through on the other side of the island because it's part of the Trent lock system. So anyway, we would fish there in this quite deep water, and it's replete with, there's some brown trout, there's enormous muskies, and there are also bass as well, smallmouth bass, which are great fighters, and a lot of pickerel and so on. One man caught an enormous muskie that was 4.5 feet long, and it had a piece of cable in its stomach that it had chewed off from somewhere. So we got into fishing. Steve got me into it. I read books on it, read Tiny Bennett, The Art of Angling, and bought all my equipment, and like anything, Chris, you know when I get into something, I go, whoom, full blast, learn it inside out, learn all the Palomar knots and all of these things which give you 100% line strength, etc. Steve and I were fishing for smallmouth bass, and we were using a MEPS lure each. Now, a MEPS is a spinner, and it's a really efficient one, so when you draw it through the water even slowly, the spinner will go flipping around wildly and will draw the attention of fish. And you can get them with a silver finish, which flashes really brightly underwater, unlike nickel, which flashes black. Or you can get black lures or red or spotted or whatever. So we were fishing with these MEPS brand lures, and they snap onto the end of the line with a little leader, although you're supposed to tie them on directly. Steve casts into this deep water about 70, 80 feet from the boat, draws his line in, and he actually catches a boot, just like in those old cartoons. The only person who actually caught a boot, rubber boot. We're laughing. He takes the rubber boot off, throws it back in the boat. So we're going to throw it in the garbage when we get back ashore. Casts again. I'm casting on the other side of the boat. He gets a couple of bites, brings in his line, and the MEPS is gone. The leader's there, but it's open now. And somehow, when taking the boot off, he's unclipped the clip on the leader, and the lure was still there. Then when he cast, he's lost it about 70 feet from the boat. Too bad. That's like $3 or something back then, which you could buy a house back then for $3.
Yeah.
So I say, well, you were getting bites on that side. So as he's putting a new lure on, my next cast, I cast 70 feet from the boat, the same side he was on, reel the line in, and to our amazement, I caught his MEPS frickin' lure.
That is wild.
Tiny lure hooked onto mine, and we both nearly fainted. Actually caught the lure 70 feet away in 60 feet of water.
Talking about finding a needle in a haystack.
That's right.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. This has been Brain Software with Mike Mandel, and I'm Chris Thompson. Episode number 48. We are going to bring for you some really awesome stuff coming up in 49. We have some content in mentalism. We're going to talk more about subtle hypnosis. We're going to talk more about post-hypnotic suggestions, which we have some questions that we didn't get to this time, and you are going to love it. So make sure that you next head on over to MikeMandelHypnosis.com.
One L in Mandel.
Right. Make sure you join our mailing list so that you can get a copy of the awesome Brain Software ebook edition, which you will love. And please make sure you head on over to whichever podcasting service you're using, iTunes, etc., and write a review for this podcast, because the more people who get your reviews, the more people who are going to be able to listen and benefit from this awesome content that Mike keeps bringing to us. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you, and you'll hear from us on podcast episode number 49.
Bye.
Out in the darkness, a fugitive running, fallen from grace, fallen from grace. God be my witness, I never shall yield till we come face to face, till we come face to face. He knows his way in the dark, but mine is the way of the Lord. And those who follow the paths of the righteous shall have their reward. And if you fall as Lucifer fell, the flames, the sword. Les Miserables.
You didn't see it.
No.